I never thought I'd find my parents hunched over our kitchen table at 3 in the morning, surrounded by crumpled bills and empty whiskey bottles, planning to bet my life away like I was some kind of poker chip. The sound of hushed, desperate voices had pulled me from sleep in my cramped apartment above my parents' house in East Las Vegas. The thin walls meant privacy was a luxury none of us could afford, but tonight I wished I'd invested in better soundproofing. What I heard made my blood run cold. "She's all we have left to offer, Maria." My father's voice cracked as he spoke to my mother. "The Torino brothers aren't going to wait much longer. You saw what they did to Jimmy Castellano when he couldn't pay up." I pressed my ear closer to the vent that connected my floor to their ceiling, my heart hammering so hard I was sure they'd hear it downstairs. The Torino brothers. Everyone in our neighborhood knew those names, whispered in the same breath as warnings about breaking kneecaps and people disappearing into the Nevada desert. "There has to be another way, Roberto," my mother pleaded, her Puerto Rican accent thickening the way it always did when she was scared. "She's our daughter, not collateral. $47,000, Maria. That's what we owe them, and the interest keeps climbing every day we don't pay. The house is already mortgaged 3 times over, my truck's been repossessed, and your jewelry's been in the pawn shop for months." I knew my parents had gambling problems. Growing up in Vegas, you learned to spot the signs early. The late nights at the casinos, the mood swings that followed wins and losses, the way bill collectors' calls became background noise in our house. But I thought I'd escaped the worst of it when I moved into the garage apartment they'd converted for me after college. I thought keeping my distance and my own bank account would protect me. I was wrong. "The underground game at the Mirage backrooms," my father continued, his voice gaining a manic edge that terrified me. "Big Tony said if we can get into that game, the buy-in covers our debt to the Torinos. Winner takes all, including any additional stakes the players want to put up." Additional stakes. My stomach turned as I realized what that meant. "And what exactly are you planning to bet?" my mother asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. "Nick's hand in marriage, her future. Someone at that table will want a young, educated, pretty wife. She's got her marketing degree, she's never been in trouble. She's perfect for some rich old man who wants arm candy and legitimate heirs." The world tilted sideways, and I had to grip the floor to keep from falling through the vent. They were talking about selling me off like I was livestock at an auction. In 2025, in America, my own parents were planning to trade me to cover their gambling debts. I'd heard stories about arranged marriages in immigrant families, but this wasn't tradition or culture. This was desperation masquerading as a solution. This was my parents choosing their addiction over my autonomy, my dreams, my entire life. "She'll understand," my father said, but his voice lacked conviction. "She loves us. She knows we're in trouble. She'll do this for family. And if she refuses?" My mother's question hung in the air like smoke. "She won't have a choice. Once I put her up as stakes, she's committed whether she likes it or not. That's how these games work. The debt transfers to the winner, along with the prize." I'd heard enough. My legs shook as I stood up, my mind racing through options. I could confront them, but what would that accomplish? They'd already made their decision. I could run, but where would I go with my savings account that barely covered 2 months of rent? I could call the police, but underground gambling wasn't exactly something they prioritized, and my parents would be in even more danger if the Torino brothers thought we'd involved law enforcement. The smart thing would be to pack a bag and disappear before they could execute their plan. But as I looked around my small apartment at the life I'd built, my diploma on the wall, the marketing proposals spread across my desk, the photos of the few friends who'd stuck by me despite my family's reputation, I realized I couldn't just run. I was 25 years old, college-educated, and perfectly capable of fighting for myself. If my parents wanted to gamble with my life, they were about to learn that I wasn't the helpless little girl they thought I was. I grabbed my laptop and started researching everything I could find about underground poker games in Las Vegas. If they were going to bet my future, I was going to make sure I knew exactly what cards were being played and who was holding them. The game was in 3 days. That gave me 72 hours to figure out how to save myself and maybe, just maybe, save my parents from themselves in the process. But first, I needed to understand exactly who would be sitting across that poker table, because something told me this game was about much more than money. The next morning, I called in sick to work for the first time in 8 months. My supervisor at Henderson Marketing Solutions wasn't thrilled, but losing my job was the least of my concerns when my entire future was about to be decided by a deck of cards. I spent the morning at the Clark County Library using their computers to research everything I could about underground gambling in Las Vegas. What I found made my situation even more terrifying. These weren't friendly neighborhood poker games. They were high-stakes operations run by people who considered human trafficking just another business transaction. The deeper I dug, the more I understood why my parents thought this was their only option. The Torino brothers weren't just loan sharks. They were part of a network that controlled illegal gambling, money laundering, and worse throughout Nevada. Cross them, and you didn't just lose money. You lost everything. But I also discovered something else. These underground games weren't random. They were invitation-only affairs, and the guest lists were carefully curated. Someone had specifically arranged for my parents to have access to this particular game, which meant someone wanted them there. That afternoon, I drove to my friend Maya's apartment in Summerlin. Maya worked as a cocktail waitress at the Bellagio, and in Vegas, cocktail waitresses heard everything. If anyone could give me the inside scoop on underground gambling, it would be her. "You're kidding me," Maya said when I finished explaining the situation. She set down her coffee cup so hard it rattled against the saucer. "Your parents are actually going to bet you in a poker game? Like, literally bet you?" "That's the plan," I said, surprised by how calm my voice sounded. "I need to know who runs these games, who plays in them, and what I'm really up against." Maya shook her head, her dark curls bouncing around her shoulders. "Nick, these aren't the kind of people you want to mess with. I've seen what happens to girls who get tangled up in that world. They disappear, or they end up working in places that make strip clubs look like Sunday school. I'm not planning to get tangled up in anything," I said firmly. "I'm planning to get myself untangled, but I need information to do that." Maya studied my face for a long moment, then sighed. "There's a guy, Marcus Chen. He deals cards at some of the underground games. Good guy. Doesn't get involved in the ugly stuff. Just does his job and keeps his mouth shut. He might be willing to talk to you, but only if I vouch for you. Can you set up a meeting?" "I can try. But Nick, you need to understand something. Once you're in this world, even just asking questions, you're on their radar. Are you sure you want to do this?" I thought about my parents downstairs, probably planning the details of how to hand me over to a stranger. I thought about the marketing campaign I'd been working on, the promotion I was hoping for, the small but independent life I'd built for myself. All of it was about to disappear, because my parents couldn't stay away from the cards. "I don't have a choice," I said. That evening, Maya called with an address. A 24-hour diner on the outskirts of town where Marcus Chen would meet me at midnight. The location felt appropriately dramatic for what was essentially a meeting with my parents' dealer, but I supposed underground poker dealers didn't exactly hang out at Starbucks. The diner was nearly empty when I arrived, just a few truckers and late-shift workers nursing coffee and staring at their phones. Marcus was easy to spot. A thin Asian man in his 40s, wearing a dealer's vest even though he was off-duty. He looked like he'd stepped out of a casino and into the wrong decade. "You're Nick," he said as I slid into the booth across from him. It wasn't a question. "Maya said you might be able to help me understand what I'm dealing with." Marcus signaled the waitress for 2 coffees before answering. "Your parents are in deep with some very serious people. The game they're planning to enter, it's not just about money, it's about power, control, and sending messages to other people who might be thinking about welching on their debts." "What kind of messages?" "The kind that involve people becoming property instead of paying cash." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "But here's the thing that doesn't make sense. Your parents don't have the connections to get into a game like this on their own. Someone pulled strings to get them invited." My blood chilled. "What do you mean?" "I mean someone wants your parents at that table, which probably means someone wants you. This isn't random, Nick. This is targeted." The coffee arrived, but I couldn't bring myself to drink it. My hands were shaking too badly to hold the cup steady. "Do you know who's behind it?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment, studying my face in the fluorescent light. Finally, he spoke. "There's a player who's been asking questions about your family for the past few months. Goes by the name Sullivan. Nobody knows his real first name, but he's got money, power, and a reputation for getting what he wants." "What does he want with us?" "That's what I'm trying to figure out. He's not from Vegas, but he's got connections here. Old connections, the kind that go back decades." Marcus paused, then pulled out a business card and slid it across the table. "There's someone else you should talk to. Someone who might have answers about why Sullivan is so interested in your family." I looked at the card. It was plain white with just a name and phone number. Detective Sarah Rodriguez, LVMPD, retired. She worked organized crime for 20 years before she retired last year. Marcus explained. "She knows more about the underground scene than anyone still breathing. Tell her I sent you, and tell her it's about the Sullivan situation. She'll know what that means." As I left the diner, Marcus called after me. "Nick, be careful who you trust. In this world, the person trying to save you might be the same person who put you in danger in the first place." I drove home through the neon-lit streets of Vegas, Marcus's warning echoing in my head. Someone named Sullivan had orchestrated this entire situation, which meant my parents weren't just desperate gamblers. They were pawns in someone else's game, and I was the prize. Detective Sarah Rodriguez lived in a modest ranch house in Henderson, the kind of place where retired cops went to forget about the darkness they'd spent decades fighting. When she opened the door the next afternoon, I was struck by how normal she looked. A woman in her 50s with graying hair and laugh lines, wearing gardening gloves and a sun hat. "You must be Nick," she said, pulling off her gloves. Marcus called ahead. "Come in, but wipe your feet. I just mopped." Her living room was filled with the kind of furniture you'd find at any middle-class home in suburbia, but I noticed the security cameras outside and the way she positioned herself between me and the windows. Old habits, I supposed. "Marcus said you could tell me about Sullivan," I said, settling into an overstuffed armchair that had seen better decades. Sarah's entire demeanor changed. The friendly retiree disappeared, replaced by the sharp-eyed detective she'd once been. "Before I tell you anything, I need to know something. What's your mother's maiden name?" The question caught me off guard. "Delgado. Maria Delgado." "Why?" Sarah closed her eyes and rubbed her temples. Jesus. I was hoping Marcus was wrong, but she opened her eyes and looked at me with something that might have been pity. "Your mother's brother, Carlos Delgado. Does that name mean anything to you?" I searched my memory. My mother rarely talked about her family, claiming they'd all died in Puerto Rico before I was born. She said her brother died when she was young, car accident or something. "Not a car accident," Sarah said grimly. "Carlos Delgado was murdered 25 years ago right here in Las Vegas. He was a federal witness in a case against organized crime families operating between Puerto Rico and Nevada. Money laundering, drug trafficking, human trafficking, the works." My stomach dropped. What does that have to do with Sullivan? James Sullivan was Carlos's handler, FBI agent assigned to witness protection. Carlos was supposed to testify against the Torino family. Yes, the same Torinos your parents owe money to, and several other crime families. But the night before his testimony, someone got to him. The room felt like it was spinning. Someone killed him, shot him execution style in his safe house. The case fell apart without his testimony, and a lot of very bad people walked free. Sullivan's career was ruined. The FBI transferred him to a desk job in Montana, and he retired 5 years later under a cloud of suspicion. I tried to process what she was telling me. "You think Sullivan blamed my uncle for ruining his career?" "I think Sullivan blamed everyone connected to Carlos Delgado for ruining his life. Your mother disappeared right after Carlos was killed, changed her name from Maria Delgado to Maria Santos, moved to a different part of the city, and started over. She thought she was safe. But Sullivan found her. Took him 25 years, but yes. And now he's orchestrating this whole poker game scenario to get what he's always wanted." "Which is what exactly?" Sarah leaned forward, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "Revenge. Your uncle's testimony would have sent a lot of people to prison, including some of Sullivan's friends on the wrong side of the law. When Carlos died and the case collapsed, Sullivan didn't just lose his career, he lost his protection. The crime families he'd been investigating came after him. He had to disappear, change his identity, live in hiding for years." My head was reeling. "So this isn't really about my parents' gambling debts?" "Oh, the debts are real. But Sullivan's been manipulating the situation, probably for months. I'd bet money he's the one who introduced your parents to the higher stakes games that got them in so deep. He's been setting this up, waiting for the perfect moment to spring his trap. But what does he want with me? I wasn't even born when my uncle died." Sarah's expression grew even grimmer. "You're Carlos Delgado's niece, his bloodline. In Sullivan's twisted mind, you represent everything he lost. By controlling you, by making you pay for your uncle's choices, he gets his revenge on the family that destroyed his life." I felt sick. "So I'm not just collateral for my parents' debts. I'm the real target." "Marcus was right to send you to me," Sarah said, standing up and moving to a filing cabinet in the corner. "I've been tracking Sullivan for the past year, ever since I started hearing his name again in connection with underground gambling. I knew he was planning something, but I didn't know what until Marcus called." She pulled out a thick folder and handed it to me. "These are copies of everything I have on Sullivan, your uncle's case, and the current underground gambling network. Study them, but don't take them home. If Sullivan's been watching your family, your house isn't safe." I opened the folder and saw photos, police reports, newspaper clippings, and what looked like surveillance photos of a man I didn't recognize. "Is this Sullivan?" "Taken 6 months ago outside the Palazzo. He's been in Vegas preparing for this for a while." Sarah sat back down, her expression serious. "Nick, you need to understand something. Sullivan isn't just some ex-FBI agent with a grudge. He's been working with the very crime families he used to investigate. He's dangerous, connected, and patient. This poker game isn't just about money or revenge, it's his end game. Then I need to stop it." "How?" "Your parents don't know any of this history. They think they're just trying to clear their debts. If you tell them the truth, they might panic and do something stupid that gets them killed. If you don't show up to the game, Sullivan will probably have them eliminated anyway as a message to anyone else who might cross him. I stared at the folder in my hands, feeling the weight of 25 years of secrets and lies. There has to be another way. Sarah was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "There might be, but it's dangerous, and you'd be putting your life on the line. More than it already is?" Fair point. She leaned forward again. The game is invitation only, but the invitations don't specify who has to attend. Just that someone from your family has to be there to cover the debt. What are you saying? I'm saying that if someone else showed up in your place, someone who knew Sullivan's real agenda and was prepared to turn the tables on him, it might change the entire game. My heart started racing. You want to take my place? I want to finish what I started 25 years ago, Sarah said. I was Carlos's backup contact when Sullivan was compromised. I knew your uncle, and I know Sullivan. It's time to balance the scales. I looked at this woman who'd spent her career fighting crime and was now offering to risk everything to save a stranger's family. Why would you do this for us? Because 25 years ago, I made a promise to your uncle that I'd protect his family if anything happened to him. I failed your mother once. I'm not going to fail you. As I left Sarah's house with a phone number to call and a plan that terrified me, I realized that the poker game was just the beginning. Sullivan had been planning this revenge for decades, but he hadn't counted on one thing. The people who'd loved my uncle were still alive, and they were ready to fight back. The night of the poker game, I sat in Sarah's car 3 blocks away from the Mirage, watching her adjust the wire she'd taped under her blouse. The plan was simple in theory. Sarah would take my place at the table, confront Sullivan, and try to record enough evidence to bring down his operation. In reality, we both knew she was walking into a trap with no backup and 25 years of rage driving the man who'd set it. You sure about this? I asked for the 10th time, my voice barely steady. Once you walk into that room, there's no guarantee you'll walk back out. Sarah checked her concealed recording device one more time. I've been preparing for this confrontation since the day your uncle died. Sullivan destroyed a lot of lives, including his own. It's time to end this. And if something goes wrong, then you take the evidence I've given you and go to the FBI. Agent Maria Santos at the Las Vegas field office. She's clean, and she's been investigating the connection between the Torinos and Sullivan for months. Sarah handed me a business card. Promise me you won't try to be a hero if this goes sideways. I promised, but we both knew I was lying. Sarah had spent the past 2 days coaching my parents on the story, that I was sick with food poisoning and couldn't attend, but that Sarah Rodriguez, a family friend and former police officer, would take my place as their representative. My father had been surprisingly agreeable, probably because he was desperate enough to accept help from anyone. My mother had been harder to convince, but Sarah's law enforcement credentials and her knowledge of the Torino brothers had finally won her over. What my parents didn't know was that Sarah had also spent those 2 days calling in favors with former colleagues, setting up surveillance on the building and arranging for backup units to be positioned nearby. She might have been retired, but she wasn't stupid. At exactly midnight, Sarah got out of the car and walked toward the Mirage's employee entrance. I watched her disappear into the building, then drove to my predetermined position in the parking garage where I could monitor police radio traffic on Sarah's scanner. The next 2 hours were the longest of my life. At 12:47 a.m., my phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. He's here. Looks exactly like the photos. Game starting now. At 1:15 a.m., 5 players total. Sullivan, 2 Torino associates, 1 unknown, and me. Stakes confirmed. Winner takes all debts and assets. At 1:43 a.m., Sullivan knows who I am. Situation tense but stable. Then nothing for 45 minutes. At 2:28 a.m., the police scanner crackled to life. Units respond to disturbance at the Mirage employee level. Possible shots fired. My blood turned to ice. I grabbed my keys and started driving toward the casino, every instinct screaming at me to ignore Sarah's warnings about staying away. I was 2 blocks away when my phone rang. Unknown number. Hello, Nick. The voice was calm, controlled, with a slight Midwestern accent. I believe you're looking for Detective Rodriguez. Who is this? James Sullivan. And before you ask, your friend is alive. For now. But we need to have a conversation, you and I. Face to face. Where? The parking structure where you're sitting right now. Level 3, northeast corner. Come alone, and come now, or Detective Rodriguez joins your uncle in whatever afterlife awaits people who interfere with my business. The line went dead. I sat in my car for exactly 30 seconds, weighing my options. I could call the FBI number Sarah had given me, but by the time they mobilized, Sarah would be dead. I could call 911, but Sullivan obviously had enough connections to know where I was, which meant he probably had people watching the police response too. Or I could go to level 3 and face the man who'd spent 25 years planning his revenge against my family. I chose option 3. The parking garage was eerily quiet as I drove up the ramps. Most of the late-night casino crowds were inside gambling, not worried about their cars. Level 3 was nearly empty, just a few scattered vehicles and the hum of fluorescent lights. Sullivan was waiting by the northeast stairwell, exactly as promised. He was smaller than I'd expected, maybe 5'8", with graying hair and the kind of forgettable face that had probably served him well in undercover work. He looked like someone's accountant, not a man who'd orchestrated murders and spent decades planning elaborate revenge schemes. "You look like your uncle," he said as I approached, keeping my hands visible and my distance respectful. Same defiant expression, same stubborn refusal to accept reality. "Where's Sarah?" "Safe, for the moment." He pulled out his phone and showed me a photo. Sarah zip-tied to a chair in what looked like a hotel room, very much alive but clearly not going anywhere. She's quite impressive, actually. Managed to record almost an hour of very incriminating conversation before my associates discovered her wire. "What do you want?" Sullivan laughed, but there was no humor in it. 25 years ago, your uncle destroyed my life, my career, my reputation, my safety, all gone because he couldn't keep his mouth shut when it mattered. He was trying to do the right thing. The right thing? Sullivan's calm facade cracked slightly. "Do you have any idea what my life has been like since Carlos Delgado decided to play hero? I've been hunted by the very criminals I spent years investigating. I've had to change my name, my appearance, my entire identity. I've watched from the shadows while the people who should have been in prison built empires on the graves of their victims. So you became one of them. I became pragmatic. When you can't beat them, you find a way to profit from them. The Torinos, the other families, they needed someone with FBI training to help them stay ahead of law enforcement. I needed protection and money. It was a mutually beneficial arrangement. Until now. Until now, he agreed. Because now I finally have the chance to complete the circle. Your uncle took everything from me, so I'm going to take everything from his family. Starting with you." I felt surprisingly calm considering I was facing a man who'd spent decades planning to destroy my life. "Except your plan didn't work. Sarah's alive, the poker game is blown, and you're standing in a parking garage threatening a marketing assistant instead of enjoying your victory." Sullivan smiled, and for the first time, I saw genuine amusement in his expression. "You think this was about the poker game?" "The poker game was theater, Nick. A way to get everyone in the same place at the same time so I could clean up all the loose ends at once." "What loose ends?" "Your parents know too much about my operation now. Detective Rodriguez has been investigating me for months. You've been asking questions all over town. The Torino brothers have served their purpose and are becoming a liability." He shrugged. "Sometimes you have to burn down the whole house to get rid of the termites." As if on cue, I heard sirens in the distance. Multiple vehicles getting closer. "The FBI will be here in about 3 minutes," Sullivan continued conversationally. "They'll find evidence of a turf war between the Torino brothers and a rival family. Several bodies, including a retired detective who got caught in the crossfire and a young woman who was in the wrong place at the wrong time. Very tragic. Very neat. You can't kill everyone who knows the truth. Watch me." Sullivan reached into his jacket, and I knew I had about 2 seconds to do something before this conversation ended with a bullet. That's when I heard Sarah's voice from the stairwell behind him. "FBI, drop your weapon!" But it wasn't Sarah who stepped into the light. It was Agent Maria Santos, flanked by 2 other federal agents, all with their guns drawn and pointed at Sullivan. Sullivan's hand froze halfway to his gun. "How?" "Detective Rodriguez's wire was broadcasting to more than just a recording device," Agent Santos said. "We've been listening to your confession for the past 5 minutes. It's over, Sullivan." As they handcuffed him, Sullivan looked at me with something that might have been respect. "Your uncle would be proud. You're just as much trouble as he was." "I'll take that as a compliment," I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. Agent Santos approached me as they led Sullivan away. "Your friend, Detective Rodriguez, is fine, by the way. She's the one who set up the wire relay. Smart woman. Where is she?" "Probably arresting the Torino brothers as we speak. This operation just netted us the biggest organized crime bust in Nevada in 20 years. As the sirens faded and the federal agents departed with their prisoner, I sat on the concrete wall of the parking garage and finally let myself shake. It was over. The 25-year circle of revenge that had started with my uncle's murder was finally closed. 3 months later, I was sitting in my new office at Rodriguez Security Consulting, reviewing case files for our latest client, when Sarah knocked on my door frame. "How's the transition going?" she asked, settling into the chair across from my desk. The small scar above her left eyebrow from her encounter with Sullivan's associates had faded, but it served as a daily reminder of how close we'd all come to disaster. Better than I expected, I said, closing the file on a corporate embezzlement case we'd been hired to investigate. Turns out a marketing degree translates pretty well to private investigation work. Who knew that understanding consumer behavior would help me spot when people are lying about their finances? Sarah laughed. I told you you'd be good at this. Any regrets about leaving Henderson Marketing? I considered the question seriously. After Sullivan's arrest and the FBI's takedown of the Torino organization, my life had changed in ways I never could have anticipated. The story had made national news. FBI sting brings down 25-year revenge plot. And suddenly I was fielding job offers from security firms, private investigation agencies, and even a few true crime podcasters who wanted to interview me. But it was Sarah's offer that had intrigued me most. Rodriguez Security Consulting was a one-woman operation she'd started after retiring from the police force, specializing in cases involving organized crime, missing persons, and corporate fraud. She needed a partner, and after everything we'd been through together, I couldn't think of anyone I'd rather work with. No regrets, I said. Though I have to admit, explaining to my parents that I was leaving my stable marketing job to become a private investigator was almost as difficult as explaining that they'd been pawns in a decades-old revenge plot. How are they doing, by the way? Better. The therapy is helping, and they've been clean from gambling for 94 days now. Dad got a job at a construction company in Henderson, and Mom's working part-time at a grocery store. It's not glamorous, but it's honest work, and they're rebuilding their credit slowly. The truth was, my parents had been devastated when they learned the full story. Finding out that their gambling addiction had been exploited by someone seeking revenge against a family member they'd thought was dead had shaken them to their core. But it had also given them something they'd never had before, a reason to get clean that was bigger than just their own problems. And the house? Paid off last month, thanks to the reward money from the FBI. The federal government had offered a substantial reward for information leading to Sullivan's arrest and the dismantling of his organization. Combined with the money recovered from Sullivan's accounts and the civil settlement from the casino that had been hosting illegal games, my family had not only cleared their debts but actually come out ahead financially. It's weird, owning the house outright. I keep waiting for another bill collector to call. Sarah stood up and moved to the window that overlooked the Las Vegas Strip. From our office in downtown Vegas, we could see the mirage in the distance, where this whole ordeal had nearly ended in tragedy. You know, I've been thinking about that night in the parking garage. Sullivan was right about one thing. Your uncle would be proud of you. You think so? I know so. Carlos Delgado spent his life fighting for justice, even when it cost him everything. You did the same thing. You could have run, could have let other people handle the situation, but instead you stood up and fought for your family. I thought about that for a moment. I had good teachers and good backup. Speaking of backup, Sarah said, returning to her chair, I got a call from Agent Santos this morning. Sullivan's trial is set to begin next month, and they want us both to testify. Are you ready for that? Are you? I considered the question. Facing Sullivan in court would mean reliving the worst week of my life, but it would also mean seeing justice finally served for my uncle's murder and all the other crimes Sullivan had committed over the past 25 years. Yeah, I said. I'm ready. Sarah smiled. Good, because there's something else. The FBI has offered us a consulting contract. They want Rodriguez Security to help them investigate other cold cases involving organized crime and witness protection failures. Apparently, our little adventure has shown them some gaps in their system that need fixing. Federal consulting work? That sounds dangerous, complicated, potentially very lucrative. I was going to say exciting. We were interrupted by the phone ringing. Sarah answered it, listened for a moment, then hung up and looked at me with the expression I'd learned meant we had a new case. That was a woman named Jennifer Martinez. Her brother disappeared 6 months ago after he started asking questions about irregularities in his company's pension fund. The police think he ran off with embezzled money, but she thinks something happened to him. What kind of company? A casino supply business with contracts all over Nevada. Sarah handed me a notepad with the details she'd written down. The interesting part? The company's main client was the Torino organization. I looked at the information, feeling the familiar surge of adrenaline that came with a new investigation. So we could be looking at another organized crime case? Looks like it. Question is, are you ready to dive back into that world? I thought about everything that had brought me to this moment. My parents' near destruction, my uncle's sacrifice, Sullivan's twisted quest for revenge, and my own decision to fight back instead of becoming a victim. I thought about the marketing campaigns I'd been working on 6 months ago, with their focus groups and demographic studies and carefully calculated consumer appeals. That life felt like it belonged to someone else now. Let's go get him, I said, grabbing my jacket and the car keys. As we left the office and headed into the Nevada heat, I realized that Sullivan had been wrong about one thing. He'd thought that destroying my family would give him the revenge he'd sought for 25 years. Instead, his actions had forged us into something stronger than we'd ever been before. My parents were rebuilding their lives with honesty and determination. Sarah had found a new purpose in her retirement, using her skills to help people like my family who'd been caught in the crossfire of other people's crimes. And I had discovered that sometimes the most unexpected paths lead to exactly where you're supposed to be. James Sullivan was going to spend the rest of his life in federal prison, but the family he'd tried to destroy was thriving. That felt like justice to me. As we drove toward our new case, I caught my reflection in the passenger window and saw something I hadn't seen in months. A woman who was in control of her own destiny, ready to face whatever challenges came next. My name is Nick Rodriguez, and I'm a private investigator. 6 months ago, my parents almost bet my life away in a poker game, but they didn't expect who'd be sitting across the table. Neither did I. But sometimes the best surprises are the ones that show you exactly how strong you really are.